They said she had death in her shadow, not because she looked dangerous, but because trouble always came walking behind her. Folks didn't know where she came from, only that she showed up one morning, barefoot, bleeding, and wearing a torn dress that had seen too many nights, and not enough mercy. It was the kind of summer where the heat never let go. The sun sat heavy in the sky like it had nowhere else to be, and the wind was nothing more than a memory. Dust clung to everything: horses, boots, skin, turning the whole town the color of old paper. Dry Creek wasn't much, just a crooked row of buildings, a church missing its bell, and a saloon that stayed busy because there wasn't anything else to do. Mornings came slow, nights came slower, and in between, folks just tried to survive. There was no law worth writing home about. Sheriff was too old, his deputy too drunk, and folks mostly kept to their own business unless gossip knocked on their door. Out beyond town, the land stretched flat and wide, broken only by fence posts leaning like tired men. Coyotes howled at sundown, but most folks had stopped listening. They were used to loneliness. They were used to silence. And in a place like that, when someone new came walking in, especially a woman alone, it felt like thunder cracking across a still sky. The town didn't say it, but they all felt it. Something had shifted. Nobody knew her name that first day. She didn't offer it, and no one dared ask. She walked like her feet hurt, but kept moving like stopping would cost her more. The torn dress she wore had once been blue. Now it was the color of ash and blood. One side hung lower, like it had been ripped in a fight she didn't finish. Her hands were scraped raw, nails chipped, and her face carried the look of someone who'd buried too much and spoke too little. She sat behind the saloon for hours, leaning against a barrel like her bones couldn't hold her up anymore. No tears, no words, just silence, the heavy kind that makes even dogs stop barking. Some said she looked like a ghost. Others said she looked like trouble. But old Martha, who ran the kitchen at the saloon, said something else. That girl's been through fire, and I'd bet my apron she didn't start it. Later, when she finally stood up and walked inside, she didn't ask for food or drink, just a place to sit. And when the bartender, Red Hank, asked where she came from, she just stared at him like he should already know. There was something about her, not just the silence, but the weight of it, like she was carrying a story too sharp to tell and too painful to forget. A few folks thought she might be running. Others figured she'd already stopped running and started planning. Whatever the truth was, one thing became clear by sundown. She wasn't just passing through. He first saw her from the edge of his land, where the fence was half finished and the sky always looked too wide. Jack Whitlow wasn't a man used to visitors. Not since the war. Not since he buried his boy. But that morning, just as the sun cracked over the ridge, there she was, standing still, like the wind had put her there. She didn't knock, didn't call out, just stood quiet near the broken gate, holding nothing but a small cloth bundle tied tight in her arms. The dress she wore was the same one folks in town had talked about. Torn, dirt-streaked, and soaked at the hem from crossing the creek. Her eyes, though, they didn't shake, not even when his dog barked. Jack didn't move at first. He just watched her from the porch, coffee cooling in his hand. There was something in the way she held that bundle, not with fear but with care, like whatever was inside mattered more than her own breath. Finally, he stepped down, slow and calm. "You lost?" he asked. She didn't answer. "You hurt?" Still nothing. Just those eyes. He should have turned her away. That would have been easier. Safer. But something in him, maybe the part that still missed his son's laugh, told him to open the gate. She stepped through without a word. Later, when he opened that bundle while she sat quiet on the porch, he didn't find money, didn't find food or clothes. Just a letter. Old, yellowed, and sealed in red wax. And from the way she looked when he held it up, he knew one thing for sure. Whatever was written in that letter, someone had already killed for it. She didn't say a word for 3 days. Jack didn't push. He wasn't the type. His life had been carved out of silence. Too many years of grief, too many nights talking only to the wind. So he let her be. Let her sit on the porch in the evenings, staring out past the fence line like she was waiting for something to come riding over the hills. Or maybe hoping nothing ever would. He brought her food, left it without a word. She ate slow, like someone who'd learned not to trust too much too fast. By the fourth morning, she was feeding his dog scraps of biscuit. That was something. By the fifth, she was hanging his laundry without being asked. Jack noticed small things. She folded towels tight, like someone used to keeping order in chaos. She flinched at loud sounds, but never ducked. And at night, she'd sit under the stars with that letter in her lap. Unopened, untouched, but never far from her hands. He never asked about it. She never offered. But when a storm rolled in and thunder cracked through the valley, she came inside without a word, sat by the fire, and wrapped herself in the same old quilt his boy used to use. Jack didn't say anything. He just poured her a second cup of coffee and sat down beside her. Sometimes that's how it starts. Not with words, but with quiet shared and understood. Dry Creek was a small town, but its whispers traveled faster than the wind. By the end of the week, everyone knew the woman in the torn dress was staying out at Jack Whitlow's place. And in a town where folks counted strangers like storm clouds, that didn't sit quiet. At the saloon, folks leaned in close and lowered their voices. "She's hiding something," one man muttered. "Heard she was part Apache," another claimed. "No," said a third, shaking his head. "I heard she killed her husband, slit his throat, and walked west." Martha, wiping down the bar, rolled her eyes. "Y'all wouldn't know the truth if it danced naked in front of you." But the talk didn't stop. The sheriff came riding by the ranch, slow and curious. Didn't ask much, just tipped his hat and said he'd heard a lady was staying out here. Jack nodded once and said she was. That was all. Even the preacher brought it up in Sunday prayer, talking about wolves in sheep's clothing and how the devil could wear any face, even a pretty one. Jack heard all. So did she. But neither of them spoke on it. She just kept chopping wood and folding laundry. He just kept fixing fence posts and feeding the chickens. Still, every night when the sun dropped low and the wind kicked up, she checked the hills with careful eyes. Not because she feared the town, but because she knew someone worse might be coming. It was a Wednesday when the riders came. 3 men, dressed in black dusters, with faces burnt by sun and wind. They didn't speak when they passed through town, just watered their horses, tipped their hats low, and kept riding west toward Jack's land. But their silence said more than words ever could. Martha saw them first. She was sweeping the porch of the saloon when they passed. Her hand stopped midair. "Those ain't drifters," she whispered. At the ranch, Jack was fixing the fence line again when he heard hooves, steady, heavy, not like a neighbor's visit. She was already standing on the porch, that same letter clutched in her hand, her face pale but steady. "You know them?" Jack asked. She nodded once, slow and hard. "They're not here to talk." The men stopped at the gate. The one in front dismounted, tall with a scar across his cheek like a lightning strike. "We've come for what's ours," he called out. Jack didn't move. "Ain't nothing here that belongs to you." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You don't know what she's carrying." "I know she's free," Jack said, "and she ain't yours to claim." The other 2 men shifted in their saddles, hands near their guns. Jack stood calm, one hand resting near the hammer hanging from his belt. The girl stayed silent, eyes locked on the leader like she was remembering something awful and choosing not to run from it this time. "Last chance," the man said, voice turning low. "Hand her over. That letter too, before we take it." Jack stepped forward, slow and even. "You want her, you'll have to go through me." There was a pause, a long, burning pause. Then the man smiled again. "We'll be back at sundown." They turned and rode off, dust trailing behind them like smoke. Jack looked at her. "What's in that letter?" She looked down at it, then back at him. "Truth," she said. "And truth gets people killed." They came back like they promised, just as the sun began to bleed into the hills, painting everything gold and red. But this time, they weren't just passing through. They came with their rifles ready, their horses snorting with nerves. Jack was already out front, shotgun across his lap, eyes calm but steady. She stood behind him at first, still and silent, just like always. But when the lead rider shouted, "You've had your warning," she stepped forward. Jack moved to block her, but she shook her head. "I'm not hiding anymore." She walked past him, barefoot in the dirt, dust curling around her ankles. The wind picked up like it was listening. The men looked at each other, confused. This wasn't the girl they'd chased across 2 territories. This wasn't the girl who used to flinch. "I didn't steal the letter," she said loud enough for them all to hear. "I wrote it." They didn't speak. "It names names," she continued. "Men in government. Men in railroads. Men who built towns with blood money and buried the ones who spoke up." One of the writers spat on the ground. "You talk too much." She smiled. Not sweet. Sharp. That's the thing about silence. It ends. The one with the scar got off his horse slow. His hand hovered near his pistol. "You think a story on paper makes you strong?" "No," she said, "but surviving does. And I did. Every time you try to erase me." She took the letter from her pocket and held it up. "You want it? Take it. But just know, there's more copies now. Sent east. Sent north. You kill me, the truth still burns." The man hesitated. For the first time, he looked unsure. Jack stood beside her now, his shotgun raised. "You heard her." The men looked at each other again, saw the fire in her eyes and the steel in her voice, and they knew. The girl they hunted was gone. What stood before them now was a woman who'd already lived through death and had nothing left to fear. The man with the scar didn't say another word. He just stared at her for a long moment, like he didn't recognize her anymore, like she had turned into something he couldn't beat. Then, without a signal, he turned back to his horse. The others followed. No bullets, no shouting, just the creak of leather and the soft thud of hooves fading into the distance. Jack lowered his shotgun, but he didn't speak. She stood still, breathing deep, like her lungs were learning how to fill again. The letter stayed in her hand, tight but steady. They watched the dust trail disappear into the horizon. Only then did she sit, legs folding beneath her, arms resting on her knees. Not from fear, not from defeat, from relief. The danger had passed, at least for now, but the town had seen everything. A few watched from a distance, standing by fences or behind windows. And though no one said anything, something had shifted. The next day, a sack of flour showed up at Jack's doorstep. No note, just quiet respect. By sundown, someone left a spool of thread and a pair of worn boots by the porch rail. She didn't smile when she saw them, but she did say, for the first time in Jack's presence, "Thank you." It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. And in a place like Dry Creek, that was more than most folks ever got. The days that followed were simple, but they held something new: peace. Not the kind that comes with safety, but the kind that comes with being seen, finally, without fear. She started waking up early, before the sun crested the hills. She'd walk the fence lines with Jack's old hat on her head and the hem of a mended dress brushing against her boots. She fixed the chicken coop, patched the roof, and learned how to make coffee just the way Jack liked it. Strong, no sugar, and quiet. He didn't ask her to stay. She didn't say she would. But each day, she remained felt more like choice than accident. She even opened the letter. Jack didn't see her do it. She read it under the old elm tree one evening, light fading around her like a soft curtain. When she came back inside, she said nothing, but she folded the paper with care, slid it into the fire, and watched it burn without blinking. Some stories are meant to be told. Others are meant to be released. The porch became her favorite place. Some evenings she would hum songs she didn't know the words to. Jack would whittle something from scrap wood. They didn't talk much, but the silence felt different now. Not empty. Full. Like maybe, just maybe, life was beginning again. It was near the end of the month when someone else came walking down the road. A woman, younger, worn, eyes wide with fear, but footsteps steady. She carried nothing but a satchel and a scar running along her collarbone. When she reached the porch, she didn't knock. She just looked up, eyes locking with the woman who had once arrived the same way. Neither spoke at first. Then the woman on the porch nodded once and said, "You hungry?" The girl nodded. Jack watched from inside. He didn't ask questions. He just brought out an extra chair and set a cup down beside it. Whatever storm had passed left behind something stronger. And now, someone else had found their way to it. That night, after the girl had fallen asleep by the fire, she stepped outside alone. In her hand, she held the last piece of the torn dress, the part she'd kept hidden, tucked away like an old wound. She walked to the edge of the field, where the wind was strongest, and let it go. The fabric lifted, danced in the air for a moment, then disappeared into the dark. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just stood there, watching it go, as if in that one small act, the past had finally stopped chasing her. Some people run to survive. Others stand still and let the storm pass through them. She did both. And in the end, she wasn't just a woman with a torn dress and a secret. She was proof that even the broken can build something worth staying for and worth protecting.